I love it. I feel like I'm hopping on stage to like 14% skepticism, which I think is a good place to start. So before I even start, could we just get another round of applause for all the speakers that came before me? I mean, it's really been an incredible block. Very good. I also couldn't help but notice that the tweet board is on my left and my right, which is presenting me with like a Black Mirror-esque awareness of like what people are saying about me as I talk. So please, show me some love. Don't troll me. So I'm going to start off. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story. But the overarching point of this talk is, a couple of times throughout the day already, you've heard folks talk about the importance of AR and collaboration. And to date, what that's really meant is, how do we put AR on the heads of sort of frontline workers in factories and enable them to work with folks like remote experts to help them be more effective? And the question that we asked at Spatial was, how do we transform AR from a frontline worker technology to something that will transform how everyone that works, period, will collaborate? And so I'm going to tell you more about that. So to begin, my story personally just started off here. So I was an undergrad at Princeton, worked in the German department in this lovely building, and I was really focused on media theory and asking the question of how the information we produce and consume shapes how we see the world. And maybe it's a little too on the nose, but part of what brought me into augmented reality is because you, in a very fundamental way, literally change how people actually see the world, right? And so after Princeton, I had a couple of jaunts. I was at Bridgewater, a hedge fund, and an early employee at BuzzFeed. And it was at BuzzFeed that I continued to sort of play with this interest of, well, how does the way we consume information shape the world? And BuzzFeed, which really isn't a part of the AR conversation right now, was very ahead of its time in thinking about distribution. How does the way we discover information begin to shape how we see things? And obviously, BuzzFeed was very early on recognizing that social referrals, who recommends information to me, is very influential. And it was my work at BuzzFeed that really led me to be a grad student at MIT. And I didn't want to focus on distribution anymore. I really wanted to focus on the format itself. The medium is the message. How is the literal way I'm seeing this information going to shape how I comprehend it and apply it as I then begin to interact throughout the world? And when I was here, I co-founded VR AR at MIT, which is the school's overarching VR AR group, and co-founded, along with a bunch of people in this room and here today, the Reality Virtually Hackathon back in 2016, the third iteration of which is happening this week. So anyone is local to Boston and feels like getting their hands dirty in AR, you've been sitting in the audience and you're like, enough, I'm done listening, I want to get involved. You should definitely show up and hack. There's no hackathon in the world like it. It's the biggest VR AR hackathon in the world. And so from MIT, I wanted to get involved in the VR AR space in a very practical way. And I was fortunate that I wanted to be in New York, and Samsung Next, which is Samsung's venture capital innovation group, was hiring. And it was my job to be on the front lines thinking about what are the disruptive technologies in VR and AR that Samsung should either build or adopt. And in 2017, we met these two really amazing founders, one of whom, Jinha Lee, had previously worked at Samsung, who were in New York basically pitching us on this weird thing called Spatial. And if you go back at this time, right, you have to think about where we were, right? Like Magic Leap had raised a ton of money, Pokemon Go is doing really well, but no one had really seen anything besides for some of the stuff that PTC and Boeing and some of these enterprise-focused companies were doing actually matter in AR. For the most part, it was some interesting demos on your phone. It was something you would see at conferences like this, but nothing you would actually use. And these two founders were really special. And we actually invested in the company really at first purely on the basis of the founders. And so Anand and Jinha have both, they're both TED Talks alum. Jinha's formerly a PhD here at the Media Lab. And Anand in 2007 on the left created something called BumpTop. Anyone here remember BumpTop or use it? So it ended up getting, we have some diehards. So BumpTop ended up getting acquired by Google. And BumpTop sort of winked at AR before AR. Right? It asked the question, when I'm literally using my desktop computer, why am I learning a whole new way of interacting information that differs with how I actually interact with physical objects in the real world, right? As you could draw a line around something, you could stack objects, all with a touch interface. And so before touch became the primary means with which we interact with information, a la mobile, Anand was asking this question on desktop. And so he worked in Google for a while after getting acquired, went back to TED every year, and then in 2013, he meets this guy on the right. And Jinha was really a big rock star here at the Media Lab when he was here. Worked in the same group as John Underkoffler, who was mentioned in a previous talk. And Jinha basically built Spacetop, which was like the first desktop AR system. And he asked a very similar question, which is why when I am on my desktop computer, can I not just reach inside the computer and interact with information? Why do I have all these weird tools that prevent me from just literally interacting with the information that I want to interact with? And so 2013, they wanted to work together to build the future of AR, but as those of us who were there in 2013 remember, there was no AR hardware really in market at the time. And maybe more importantly, Jinha got a letter in the mail from the Korean government that said he never did his military service. And so he had to leave the Media Lab and actually go back to Korea. And that's how he ended up working for Samsung in a research position that was part of his military service. And so in 2015, they get back together. They're these good friends. Jinha's finally free from the military and from Samsung. And they were considering going to work again for these really big companies. But Anand had this idea like, hey, we think to build a future of AR, you have to be really nimble. You have to be a small player that can work and take a lot of risk. And when they asked this question that I led off with of like, AR, what is it good for? Like this question that no one can answer, they basically realized something. So the first thing that people were talking about is that, well, we think AR is going to see adoption at first in enterprise. Why is that? Well, frankly, the logic tends to boil down to like, big companies spend money on stuff, and which isn't necessarily wrong. And so they wanted to look at enterprise. And when they were trying to figure out like how AR was going to go in enterprise, they actually looked backwards. And I think a lot of people, when they think about AR, their attention is immediately drawn to mobile. But when Spatial think about AR, our attention is actually drawn to the desktop computer. Because when we think about desktop computing, the first graphical user interface appears in the early 80s, right? Like from Xerox. But it actually took like 10 years from the introduction of the interface to go from desktop being used by some people in offices to desktops literally being deployed at every single workspace in every office around the world. And so the question was, why then did desktop computing finally take off? It was because eventually an expansively useful application was offered that changed the way everyone could work. And this application, you could talk about Lotus Notes, you could talk about Microsoft Office. But basically, because most people's jobs revolved around organizing information, making it really, really easy for anyone to organize information, word processing, spreadsheets. As boring as it sounds, it was transformative to the way people do business. And so consequently, despite the fact that desktop computers were still quite expensive in the late 80s and early 90s, it became a must-have because the way that it doubled, tripled, quadrupled productivity for your average worker was impossible to ignore. And so the question is, how is this similar with what we're dealing with AR right now? Well, with Spatial, we definitely didn't want to reinvent the wheel and just do what a lot of folks do, which we think is wrong, which is take a thing that's perfectly fine outside of AR and throw it into AR, right? Like a word processor is perfectly good on desktop computer. You can use your phone for a lot of things that are really useful. But the thing we noticed is that the one problem that no one's been able to crack is collaboration. And we think it's becoming particularly important. And it's not just us who are saying it, right? Forbes is already talking about how companies are getting increasingly distributed, right? Like real estate in big cities is getting very expensive. And so companies are starting to build teams all over the place. And yet these folks have to work together. And Fast Company is basically saying, in fact, it's not even just about teams being distributed. You actually have a lot of lone wolf workers who are just working individually from home or a lot of different places. And remote work is becoming the new normal. And that's really weird, isn't it? You talk to anyone who's in a management position at a company, and they say, our company depends on collaboration to be successful. Yet the prevailing organizational design of most companies is to move people all over the place and put lots of blocks in the way, preventing them from collaborating. And so what do we have to solve this problem? Well, the number one solution that folks use today is video conferencing. And if any, by raise of hand, who here is video conferenced? And if you don't raise your hand, you're either ignoring me or lazy. So I'm assuming everyone's raising their hand. And now the better question is who here has found video conferencing to either be insanely awkward or useless in certain times? Right? So video conferencing is amazing. And yet, weirdly enough, we've all experienced one of the following two things, which is either no one is paying attention, right? Like on this call, I would bet that George is the only one paying attention. and instead everyone else is looking at their screen, but in reality they're on Facebook or they're looking at their finances being like, oh my God, what's happening to the market? That was me. Or the other thing is happening, right, which is like everyone's talking over each other. And in the talk immediately preceding this one, right, we talked about the importance of emotion and then emotional cues, and all of that is lost in video conference. And so you end up getting a really awkward, highly fiction-filled solution. And so then, I'm sure you're all going to relate to this, what we do instead of video conferencing is we get on a plane, right? Who here hates flying? Anyone? And for those of you that love flying, you should be a pilot. But we've all been in this experience where, OK, so this meeting is really important, or I need to go work with a bunch of people, so I'm hopping on a plane. And the reality is that it's filled with a ton of friction. It's exhausting. It takes a lot of hours. And it's extremely expensive. And there's, the travel industry, shocking as it may be, is still a 1.5 trillion with a T dollar industry in the world, which shouldn't be the case if we've solved the problem of collaboration with tools. And so that's where spatial comes in. So I'm going to pause for the video, let you watch, and then I'll keep going.
What if there was a better way to collaborate? A better way to build and work together? A way that brought us closer, as if we were sitting next to each other, face to face. What if our creativity could burst to life in the space around us? Spatial is a collective computing environment that lets teams visualize their thoughts in the room around them.
Hi, Mike. Hey, Jess. How's it going?
So whether you're on a desktop computer or scribbling notes on your phone, all your digital devices are seamlessly tied together into an infinite workspace. You can manifest your ideas before your eyes by just saying them, and in a click, expand them with the power of all the world's information. Using augmented reality's infinite canvas, pixels become tactile, letting you manipulate them like clay.
Hey, buddy.
We believe digital and physical worlds should live in harmony together. You can sketch ideas out on paper, or have them exist digitally. Spatial brings people and ideas together into a single shared environment, letting us work together in profound new ways. So whether your teams are spread around the world, or you're exploring new worlds, whether you're in a fancy AR headset, or connecting from a regular PC, anybody can join the conversation and bring their ideas to the table. In 2D or 3D, from home or work, beyond the confines of space and traditional computing, we can work together in ways we never thought possible, and unlock the power of our collective intelligence as we move from personal computing to the world's first collective computer. Welcome to the future of collaboration.
Awesome. And so I think I have 40 seconds left, so I'm going to zoom through it. But just by a quick show of hands, how many people think that's fake? And be honest, like not actually a real thing you could experience today. A couple of people think it's fake. So it was funny, when we launched that video, people were pretty blown away by it. A couple of people thought it was fake. That was actually entirely real. If you go on our Twitter, we can show you how we filmed that. We literally strapped a headset to a camera. But spatial is actually described by Next Reality Adaria Strange as one of the only demos, or only videos that actually lives up to the true-to-life app and demo. And what's so special about spatial is that we can create a 3D avatar for you that's photorealistic from a 2D photo using a neural net we built in 5 seconds. You can create in AR natively with tools in AR, or use all the existing tools you already use, be it Slack or Teams or anything, and just bring information into spatial at the drop of a hat. And we're cross-platform. And we don't just mean cross-headset, cross-platform. We mean that even folks that don't have a headset can actually join and participate in the experience through mobile or through desktop, which is extremely unique. So we launched 2 months ago, announcing our seed round. We raised $8 million from Samsung, co-founder of Uber, founder of Zynga, and some other prominent investors. We're based in New York. The response was pretty glowing. Charlie Fink, who has a way with words, is going to be here later, said it was like nothing he had ever seen before. And the thing I want to impress upon you is that spatial isn't a conceptual demo. This is real. And so we're available in the HoloLens store today. We're exclusively working with big enterprises. So if you encounter this problem where, damn, it's really hard to collaborate in my business, come and talk to us because we're looking for those partners today. So thank you very, very much. Thanks to John for having me here, and I'm excited for you and the rest of the speakers to come. So thank you so much. Woo-hoo!